Welcome back to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. This episode is brought to you by Knights of the Raritan, the Rutgers NIL Collective. Knights of the Raritan provides a unique way for Rutgers athletic programs to be successful in the ever-changing NIL environment. Become a member of the Knights of Raritan for a chance to win giveaways, unique experiences, exclusive event invites, and more. Help Rutgers student athletes with NIL. It's been a whirlwind few days for Rutgers football recruiting. Happy to have back David Anderson to break it all down. Saturday, Rutgers receiving a commitment from three-star offensive lineman Garrett Gordon. Sunday, four-star safety Tariq Hayer commits. Also, offensive line commit Nakia Wynn from the week before was bumped up to a four-star composite ranking. Monday, four-star offensive lineman Joshua Blackston commits. And then Tuesday, two big commits, both from Toms River, four-star offensive lineman Jaylene Matthews, and Tuesday night, four-star wide receiver Michael Thomas commits. Rutgers football on a serious heater on the recruiting trail. National ranking, whatever that may be, still in flux with the rating services updating, but their average player rating per the 24/7 composite rankings is 87.63, slightly above the historic 2012 class that Greg Schiano and Kyle Flood came in. David Anderson, overall thoughts in the last few days for how Rutgers recruited and able to land such a big haul on the trail?
So, yeah, first of all, if you look right now, as we're recording this on Rivals.com, Rutgers is ranked 5th nationally in recruiting. And that, like you said, comes from the top-heavy nature of the prospects that they've received commitments from over the last few days. Talked about it a week ago. The key thing with where they were at that point when they were at 18 commits was you want to get guys that are at like kind of top-heavy to bring into the program for those remaining spots. They have done that. The positions that we talked about, them possibly wanting to bulk up a little more, especially at defensive back, offensive line. They've done that. So I don't really know what else you can ask for a team coming off of the first legitimate bowl appearance in almost a decade to be at a top 10 recruiting class at the moment. Again, we know that will drop over time as the big boys get more commits, but big picture, you can't ask for anything more than that at this point in time. And again, I think it's a testament to you have a solid foundation, and your class has a foundation in itself on top of the program. And then when these guys see, hey, they're building something there, seems it's a stable environment, then you see these guys who have a lot more options starting to feel more confident in making their pledge as well. And again, this kind of goes to, I wouldn't call it Schiano 1.0, but more of what I've been calling Schiano 1.5. The players who, especially New Jersey guys that weren't necessarily sold on the vision right away, but after the success started to come, they started showing up with the program. So those are my main takeaways that I had.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I think in terms of where this class is at, in terms of that player grade average, they are tracking around a top 25, top 30 class, which would certainly be an improvement. So important, as you said, coming off of last season and giving this program serious momentum going into the 24 season. You have, as favorable of a Big Ten schedule as you're probably ever going to have. You have a strong returning core, many returning starters. So momentum is there for this to only get better with the 26 class. Just in terms of this current class, yesterday's commitment of Michael Thomas, the four-star receiver out of Toms River, and just the group as a whole now, in terms of having Jordan Houston, Vernon Allen, Sahini DeGraffendite at Atlantic City, four really talented playmaking wide receivers. What are your thoughts on Dave Brock in terms of building that position group, but also specifically with Thomas?
Well, I was looking back at our notes from, I think it was 2018, 2019, and I sent you a note that the Rutgers underclassmen at receiver had done absolutely nothing, and anyone who could catch a ball reliably or just get open reliably was going to get time. So 5 years later, we're in a completely different place in terms of where these guys are going to have to battle for playing time. I do like the young receivers that Rutgers has in their roster, but let's even talk about Ian Strong. Ian Strong had a nice season last year, but as a pure wide receiver, he was not as strong of a prospect as several of the guys that are coming in. Like when you look at Thomas, yeah, Michael Thomas does a lot of playing of quarterback when you look at his highlights, and as a receiver, there's a lot of things he could do. He could catch the ball outside of his body a little bit more. He's not really as refined. I would say he's more refined than, let's say, Rashad Rochelle, who was a pure quarterback in high school and really struggled to adapt to it at Rutgers, especially a year ago, and has since moved on. But with Thomas, the one thing that I find odd is he looks so much faster on turf than he does on grass. I don't know if I've ever remember seeing a player that looks that much more confident and fast on turf, but you look at a turf and you look at it on grass and he's a different guy. So that leads me to two possible questions. One is perhaps the grass fields they're playing on are just not that great. I mean, I know that, at the college level, if you're playing on grass, it's going to be higher quality in all likelihood. But then also, I'm curious as he adds weight, like how much weight he can add in his legs to get more explosive, because his initial first step is not that off the charts. But what makes him good is he can kind of accelerate that third and fourth gear, and then he just kind of goes around people. So it kind of reminds me of a little bit of Raheem Blackshear. And that Blackshear, it wasn't like his initial pop through the line, but if he was able to turn the corner, if our listeners remember that touchdown against Boston College when he took a short pass the distance, like those are the
Yep.
type of plays that you really see from Thomas as really where he excels, where he's kind of moving, he's flowing, and then he can just hit the gas. So for that, I mean, I think there's a lot to like about him, even though like he's not a polished receiver. There's definitely ways that they might be able to get involved early if he, again, beats out some other guys like on jet sweeps and things like that. We really haven't seen a lot of success with the jet sweep from Rutgers in the last 25 years compared to a lot of other teams. So maybe he's a guy who can do that. It just there's a lot of raw potential there, which is kind of a theme from the guys over the last couple of days, that you're banking more on potential even than what the player brings now when I look at
Mhm.
Thomas.
Yeah, that's a great point. He's also a returner, also, and a lot of his receiving was just kind of dump offs where he just made plays based on open space, and obviously adjusting to the faster pace in the Big Ten is going to be a key adjustment for him. But yeah, I think he could make an impact pretty quickly in certain aspects of the offense. But the receiving core as a whole, I think, is really strong. But you're right in terms of the four stars. A lot of it is based on potential, but I think it also bodes well because a lot of those lesser rated guys, those 3-star guys, they almost seem more ready to come in. And I think that's why I was interested in was upgraded to a 4-star. He was really impressive to us initially. But as a whole, it's the floor is higher for this class right now in terms of ratings, but also it just seems like there's a lot of potential impact guys pretty initially that could come in. We'll see how many early enroll. But overall, just in terms of what this class can be, offensive linemen, of course, are going to take some time. In terms of the offensive line, with Matthews, with Gordon, and then also with Blackston, what do you see there, and kind of what jumps out to you?
I guess I'll start with Gordon because I know even as an interior guy, I mean, there's an outside chance he could play tackle, but I really think that he is further along in what he will eventually become as a player than the other two guys. And that's one of the reasons you see his rating just like a medium 3-star versus some of the other guys who are rated by 4-star by some sources. I mean, what I like about Gordon, the guy he really reminds me of in recent memory is Brian Felter. In terms of like on every play, he's pushing his guy. If there's a guy next to him, he'll give him a little pop, right? Like he just mixes it up inside the line, and that's something that we even saw Felter play as a true freshman on that 2020 team when, and then, yeah, he didn't play as much the year after, but just the bringing that little like energy and, aggression. We talked about this with Gurman. We talked about this with Kyle in this class that you need some guys who just like to hit and like to be he likes to be in the middle of the action. So that was the thing I took away from Gordon. But again, I mean, he's probably limited to an interior position, which caps you on your rating. Blackston, he reminds me like of a ceiling of a guy who would be very notable to those who follow professional football in the area, North Jersey, of DeBrickashaw Ferguson with the Jets, or even now Olu Fashanu, who was selected in the first round. In that, I don't really think that he can add that much weight just based on his frame, but he might not need to. Depending on how tall he is, he might be able to play left tackle or right tackle, even at like 6'4", like a lean 6'4", and only if he only packs on maybe another like 20 pounds, he might be best off that way. I mean, DeBrickashaw Ferguson never really became an all-pro in the NFL, but he was a reliable blocking tackle by maintaining that weight. If he added more weight, maybe he could have become a better run blocker, but it might have been at the expense of his pass blocking. So Blackston, I see that as kind of like the best thing probably for him. And I think Rutgers has a strength and conditioning program that really does a good job identifying like what is the appropriate body type and body weight for their players, and not just trying to beef everybody up to the max. And so I feel good about the staff working with him. Matthews is kind of the anti-Gordon in a sense. I think that there's a lot of plays where he's just so strong and powerful that it's almost like he doesn't even have to give maximum effort to get the job done. And so I'm not sure if with a higher level of competition that he's going to just enjoy it more, feel like it's more of a challenge. Like he just looks like he can make plays without trying that hard sometimes. And so when he
Mhm.
reaches the Big Ten level, even just in practice, like he's not going to be able to get away with that. Even though the reason he's got that 4-star rating is because when you watch it, the plays where he does like pull or like he's pulling it from a tackle spot through the middle. He just has good natural hand placement. He can get his butt low and really leg drive, like we've talked about some of the other guys need to do a better job of. He already does all that. He just needs to start bringing it from a play to play basis. So Matthews, like I can see why the interest is like all over the board with him, because if you look at the fact that Rutgers really wants guys who love football and they really just like are bringing it every play. Like he doesn't always show that at the high school level. Contrast that with the fact that he's got these physical tools that you can't teach for some guys, and then some of them, no matter how hard they work, will never have. So I see like a very high ceiling with Matthews, but I also see a scenario where these other guys are just gonna kind of just pass him on the depth chart because of just their like desire like on a play-to-play basis. So, I mean, I think that the potential's there for Matthews. I think it's a big swing of the bat. Just like with Blackston, I think the reason he's got 4-star by some sources is because he has the potential to be a pure pass blocking tackle, which is something that's really, really coveted around the country. So from an offensive line standpoint, I think you got a nice mix of all three with these guys. And when you mix it with the rest of the crew that you're bringing in, you really got something for everybody and a very, very high floor as well as other high ceilings. So if you can just get something out of it, it's gonna be the best offensive line class you've probably ever had at Rutgers.
Yeah, for sure. Statistically speaking, the way they're ranked, me of 5 players of an 88 grade or higher, 3 4-star composites in Blackston, Matthews, and Wynn. And, Vigna at Bergen Catholic has a lot of potential. So, intriguing group for sure. And might need some development time, like you said. But yeah, Matthews is really intriguing because you're right. He's showing technique that is kind of advanced for his age, but can they pull that out of him in terms of being that dog and being kind of like if you look at Holland Pierce, the way he's developed, right, and the way that he, I feel like that is in terms of what Flaherty's done and the staff as a whole, getting him to a higher level. Obviously, wasn't nearly as highly rated coming out of high school, but has really emerged now for Rutgers and has NFL potential. Matthews obviously has the talent. Now it's a matter of getting that consistency from him. But overall, just in terms of, I wanted to talk about the power offers that this group has in the 25 class. I mean, it's really impressive. I think the floor, obviously rating wise, is higher for this class, but also so many of them have double digit power offers, 4, 5, 6, 7 Big Ten offers. Multiple commits now in the last week and a half have canceled other Big Ten visits. What do you think that says just in terms of how Rutgers is resonating on the recruiting trail, and also, I guess, the probability that they're going to be able to retain this class similarly to how they did last year as well, going into the season pretty much set and signing that class ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the canceling visits is a big deal. I know that there's a lot has to do with if you're committed, we don't want you taking visits and talking to other people. But the fact that so many guys committed it so quickly a week ago means that they must have had some sort of rapport as a group. And when you have that rapport as a group and people feel like they're part of it, this is a life thing, completely not related to football. They're just more likely to have that stickiness factor, right? Like they met each other face to face. This isn't times where even during COVID, where I'm committing, I've never met you face to face, and then all of a sudden these guys come in and then maybe they get along or maybe not. You don't know. But since so many of them were there, and then even this past weekend, you have another set of visitors who yes, they know what came the week before, and yeah, maybe they feel a little extra pressure to commit because the slots are filling up, but do they talk to each other? I mean, two of these guys are from this past weekend are from Toms River, right, area. So like, that they have interacted in some way in the past. And so I feel like even if certain players were one-off commits, like Murray from North Carolina, for example, just the fact that like there is a core in place makes it more comfortable to kind of join yourself. You're not just coming into this piecemeal thing. And so I feel like Rutgers really has building that core of the recruiting class, which is again on top of the core they've already built with the program. And then the other thing, the big takeaway that a lot of people have mentioned over the last week is when you talk about the player hosts, that's really important because we look at Chris Ash. Why did Craig Schiano have so much more success than Chris Ash? Is Greg Schiano a better defensive mind than Chris Ash? Maybe, barely, but it's more that Rutgers is a different place. To succeed here, you have to want this desire to do things that no one's ever done here before. You have to want that target on your back. You have to want that pressure that you're just not going to be another, cog in what's a great machine. Like you have to push the limits of where the program is. So you need a certain type of player that wants that. And if coaches can't communicate that, it has to come from the leadership of the players. And so, I think this is a testament to the quality of the character of the players that Rutgers has currently on the team hosting these guys and then communicating like this is what we're doing here and that they are being receptive to it. Because if you don't want to be part of that, go somewhere else. I mean, they've got the Power 5 offers to do so. I mean, I'm not trying to rag. Like, for example, let's take Michigan State, right? Michigan State lately is probably around where Rutgers is. But historically, they're a lot bigger. So if you're just another guy who is committed to Michigan State. But if you lead Rutgers to like a top 3 finish in the Big Ten, or even are just a starter, like that's uncharted territory. So I do think that the communication coming throughout the entire program has to be a big factor in why these guys feel comfortable and like this is what they want to be a part of. And identifying those guys even before they visit is half the battle, right? You don't want to find out at the last minute this isn't what the type of player that this guy is. So it's just every step along the line, Schiano's plan seems to be, coming together.
Absolutely. It's certainly a pivotal time in Schiano 2.0, just in terms of keeping this forward momentum. Had to build on that from last season, and they are, and now real opportunity to do so even more. I do think the NFL experience of Pat Flaherty and Dave Brock is really appealing and helping them have this type of success on the recruiting trail at those two position groups that are pretty well stocked in this class. Also wanted to touch on the safety, Tariq Hare, the 4-star, big time Maryland target, had a lot of Big Ten interest and offers out there. And Rutgers really developing a pipeline to the NFL in that secondary. Just your initial thoughts on Hare and what he's potentially can bring to the defense in the future.
Well, I would say kind of talked about like we talked about last year in the recruiting class. The guys who are the best players right now might not necessarily be the guys who are the best players a year from now, 4 years from now. But I think that Hare is the best player right now. If you were to tell me who is the best player right now, and you were like one guy has to play on the roster, like as a true freshman, who do you think could do the best job? I think it would be him. And the reason I say that is because nowadays, as we shift to this 4-2-5 or a 3-3-5 as some teams kind of play, we talk about the premium spots being like corner, defensive end, wide receiver, quarterback, etc. But at those other positions, yes, you can find a guy who's like a passable player at a linebacker, and he can play. Like we've seen from certain other teams, like even Michigan State, Virginia Tech, teams that Rutgers beat this year, they had guys in those positions who were okay. That's not the reason they lost to Rutgers. But if you have a guy at that position who is just elite, that makes a huge, huge difference. So at the safety spot, I mean, I think Hare can play any of the three. So he can play the loyal position, he can play the position Igbinosun plays, and he can play the Flip Dixon role. So really what he has the flexibility that, let's say Kaj Sanders or Antonio White are your other two safeties 3 years from now, hypothetically speaking, right? Then he's a guy who can slot in whatever they can play at the position that's best for them, and he can play in that other role. And so even if that's not necessarily the best position for him moving to the next level, he has the speed and the quickness to do it. I mean, the guy who he reminds me of at the high school level is former Rutgers safety Kai Hester, who was originally a Miami commit before he came back to Rutgers. I think he needs to be closer to family, and that's how he got his waiver at the time. But Hester was a good, sometimes great college player. If we remember the 2017 game against Maryland, he had a pick six that was a huge tide turner. It gave Rutgers the lead, and then they ultimately went on to win that game. And there were plays like that he made just on pure instincts alone. And I think Hayer is a lot like that. He's a big hitter, but not like a thumper, but he's a big hitter. He can make interceptions, but he's not like a pure center fielder. And so he's like a ball hawk without being a pure center fielder, which is hard to do. It's easier to be that guy if you're just staying in the back, like Duron Harmon used to do, or even like he did with the Patriots, where you're seeing everything. But to make interceptions when you're in the box is a lot harder. And I think that this is a type of player that might completely raise the level of what they can do in the safety.
And I think another aspect of this too, in terms of the 25 class, and obviously, in respect to offensive linemen, you can't expect them to play right away. But I do think the opportunity that exists after this season, so many starters leaving after the 24 season, a lot of young talent already on the roster. But I'm sure a selling point to this 25 class is that the two deep's really going to be kind of wide open going into that 25 season. You're going to have the potential to make an impact pretty quickly if you can compete at a high level. So I think that's part of it as well. And, just in terms of the long term with Rutgers is keeping that balance, right, of continuing to add talent and depth, but also continuing to up the competition. I guess any final thoughts or overall thoughts in terms of how this is looking in terms of, Schiano going into his fifth season, hitting the ground running now with recruiting and all arrows pointing up in multiple directions. Any last thoughts just on the last few days and overall where things stand with the 25 class and the program?
Well, like I said last week, I would have been happy a week ago with the class. So the fact that they've added to it, especially at these positions, I mean, this probably is going to be at the time the top 2 or 3 class in the last 25 years. I would guess it's going to finish top 2, assuming that Rutgers doesn't completely melt down on the field in the fall, which again, you never know how that's going to go. But having these guys in place, I think that this just is, again, not a, it's basically the cherry on top of what has been a very steady build over the last few years since Schiano returned. And so really now the team just has to keep winning games in the fall so that you can keep that momentum going. Don't give these guys any reason to decommit because the play on the field doesn't back up the, what has been talked about in the offseason and the momentum coming from the 2023 year. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to the season. I'm getting more nervous by the day, just like it does every year. You feel so confident, February, March, and then every day closer to the season, you're like, well, Virginia Tech's better than they were when we played them last year. And okay, we got 5 or 6 teams in a row that we've never seen Rutgers beat ever. And like these things are starting to, kind of come into play. But when you've got the foundation in place and these guys are coming to practice and getting better every day, I think we might continue to see growth there. And then, keeping this, at least the core of this recruiting class together. Again, you're not going to keep all these guys, but the core of this class together is really a way to move the program another step forward as we move into 2025.
Yeah, and last year with the success that they did have, and obviously winning all those games up front, I think helped. They only lost one commit during the fall season, and I think there's real hope that will be very similar to this year. Obviously, you have a strong core of Jersey kids, but even just in terms of the other states, it's as you mentioned kind of before, there's that camaraderie. There's multiple Georgia commits. There's multiple North Carolina commits. In the Midwest, there's a few. So there is that kind of connection there. And I think that's obviously huge now in terms of focusing on retention. We don't know how many spots remain. Obviously, they could plug some holes with transfer portal in the future. Schiano's pretty much a master of just how roster management. And obviously, the last 2 weeks has been huge for the program. David Anderson, thank you so much for being here again. Any last takeaways that we missed that you wanted to point out?
Just to remember that early commits come from the year prior. and then decommits come from the year immediately preceding the commitment, right? So really the reason that we're seeing this uptick in recruiting is because of the success Rutgers had last year. So even though they're the 25 class, they're coming in based on the success of 23, not of what ultimately is 24, what Rutgers is going to do on the field. So, I mean, when you look back in the last couple of years, it's like the year that the guys come is usually not right. The better classes are not the year after the best year. It's the year 2 years prior that they're really being recruited based off of. So that's why, yeah, like the core of the class is in place because of what happened in 20. The 25 class is in because of what happened in 23. But if the 24 season goes awry, that's when you would see like decommits. Like that's just to keep in mind. Like that's why like the 2022 class was so good because that was built on the success from 2020, even though 21 was not nearly the season that they wanted to have. So, I mean, it's just something to keep in mind that, you know, when we look towards the 26 class, that's going to be more based on what happens in the fall, this fall.
Right, which is the flip side of that coin is if they get off to a hot start or they win that 8-9 game past that threshold, it really sets them up really, really well to build off of 25 and have an even better class in 26. And obviously keeping that forward momentum is so key because once you do lose that momentum, it's so hard to get it back. So
Right.
yeah, obviously things pointing in the right direction. David Anderson, appreciate all your insight as always. Exciting times at Rutgers on the recruiting trail. A lot of national projections coming out of late. Rutgers is kind of the hot pick as the sleeper in the Big Ten. We can get more into that soon before the season starts, which, yes, makes me nervous as well. But obviously, great stuff happening on the recruiting trail. We'll keep you posted on everything here at the Scarlet Faithful podcast. And thanks so much for listening and watching once again.